This is Beach Talk Radio.
Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. This is your captain speaking, Mean Gene. Mean Gene. The following will be a test of the ship's whistle, the sonar alarm, the cable alarm, and the atomic attack alarm.
And hello, everybody, and welcome to a special episode of Beach Talk Radio. Tom Ashford is our guest today. Tom is a home on Fort Myers Beach and is calling in for this episode from Kentucky, where he's vacationing. Tom's dad, George Ashford, was in the 427th Bombardment Squadron. He flew 3 missions in World War II back in 1944. His third mission, which was headed to Magdeburg, Germany, was shot down. 8 of the 9 crew members on the plane died, including George, who would have turned 25 years old only 11 days later. The pilot, Charles Glasgow, was captured and became a POW. Tom Ashford contributed to the Blue Star Memorial, which was recently unveiled at the Fort Myers Beach Public Library. The National Garden Club honors veterans and active service members by installing the signs throughout the country. The first sign was dedicated in May of 1949, and that was in Key West, Florida. And the Estero Island Garden Club, a member of the National Garden Club, sponsored the memorial marker dedication. Tom, thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate your time. What is your connection to Fort Myers Beach?
Well, we've been coming down there since 1972 when my mom bought a house there on the beach, and that became our vacation spot from then on. In 1989, my first wife and I built a house actually next door to her house, and we've been coming there ever since. And I've been a permanent resident of Florida, Fort Myers Beach, twice, and we're currently resident. Have been for 6 years or 7 years. And it's interesting. I have 2 stepbrothers and a stepsister. My stepsister ended up buying Mom's house when Mom died. One brother lives on the street behind us in a house directly behind me, in a house he has had for about 10 or 11 years. And the other brother rents down there up the street from us. So we spend winters together in Fort Myers Beach.
Sounds like you make up half the population of the beach. You have so many family members down here.
Well, we make up a big chunk of our neighborhood association.
Right. So what is your connection to Kentucky? You're up with family up there.
Well, I was born in Kentucky, and this is where my family lived. My mother and father met at college at Transylvania University in Lexington, where her parents had both graduated. I ended up going to school there and graduating there and meeting my first wife there, and raised the kids there. And so Lexington has been our place until we retired to Florida.
So let's talk about your dad. You were how old were you when your dad passed away in the war?
1 year and 20 days.
So how were you able to learn as you got older what took place? What I'm sure your mom taught you a lot about that, but how did you also research it yourself?
Well, first of all, I received a letter from Charles Glasgow, who sent a letter to and personally visited each of the families of his crew members to explain to them something about their son and what happened, what he remembered of the situation. It's something that he evidently carried to his grave with him. He wouldn't talk, other than that time, he would not talk about the incident ever. It troubled him tremendously that he had all of those men under his care and lost everyone. And he wrote a letter to me, even though I was too young to read it by far. But he sent it to my mother, and she gave it to me, I think, when I was 10. And I still have it. And he tells me of his fun times with my dad and what they did in England between missions and so on, and what happened on that fateful day, and what happened to him afterwards. And I still have the letter. I used it actually to get some directions in 2006 when I retired. My wife and I went to Copenhagen for a Rotary convention and decided to make a 3-week trip out of it and travel through Europe. So rented a car, flew out of Fort Myers Beach to Dusseldorf, Germany, drove up to Copenhagen. And after the convention, we drove down into Germany because I determined I was going to try to find this little place called Herte Forest where the plane crashed. And we found Herte, the little town of Herte, beautiful little city. I should say city, community, because it was about 300 houses and one factory. Interesting time. We drove into the town, drove up and down all the streets and didn't see a soul. I was just going to ask somebody if anything, that if there was any older people in town, I might talk to or anything. Well, we were starting to drive out of town and went past this factory, and there was a semi-truck parked in front, and there was a guy sitting in behind the wheel. So I stopped the car, went over and asked him if he spoke English, and he said no. Sent me inside, and a woman inside called a fellow by the name of Herr Rudolph. Now, Herr Rudolph was in his early 80s and could barely speak English. But I kept talking to him about the forest. And so he took me outside and kind of walked next door where there was a house. And a little bit farther, there was a clump of trees, maybe 20 or 25 trees. And he said, forest, Herte Forest. And I asked him about the plane, but he didn't know anything about it. So he took me back to the factory, called for his son, who was now the president of this manufacturing company. And the son came down, could speak English, and interpreted for us. And at which time I found out that Herr Rudolph was 17 years old on that day. Not that was not his birthday, but when it happened, he was 17. He'd stayed home from school that day sick. He was upstairs in the bedroom in the little house next to the factory, asleep, when they heard this loud noise of bombers flying over. And suddenly the bombers got attacked by planes in the Luftwaffe. Some of the bombers started dropping the bombs in order to lighten their load. And one of the bombs landed on a tree in the front yard of this house, blew the tree up on top of the house. He remembered it completely. Pointed down the road, down the hill, and said that that's where the plane crashed. And it was right next to the plane crash that the bodies were buried. All of them, but one that they knew of. Anyway, the son went with my wife and I down to the spot, and it was no longer a forest down there, but during the war, that area had been a large forest. It had been cleared out, and part of it had been turned into a reservoir. But the area that they took us to and showed us was right next to the reservoir. And he said, this is where they were buried. Right here's where the plane crashed. And I tell you what, it was really an interesting, heartwarming. In the information that I sent you, Ed, one of the things said that they noticed, other planes noticed that there were 2 parachutes open going down from the plane. And in Charles Glasgow's letter, he also mentioned that the navigator had survived the crash. Well, he got out of the plane. Let me put it that way. It was later found that the navigator had tried to hide in a barn in the town of Herté, where the townspeople found him, called the sheriff, and it was that night the sheriff came in and shot him, killed him. And after the war, at the Nuremberg trials, the sheriff was tried and convicted and spent the rest of his life in prison.
Do you know the name? Do you know who the name of the navigator? That wasn't your dad, the navigator. He was the co-pilot.
He was the co-pilot. And right offhand, I'm sorry, I can't tell you.
That's okay. What is, Tom, what is it like for you emotionally to go through all this research and to go to the spot where it happened? I mean, what's going through your mind, and what are you thinking when you find the location and you find somebody that knows what took place? It's got to be really emotional.
It was very emotional, and we just kind of stood there. My wife was, she understood, and she was just very quiet, and it was just a period of I don't know, just it was exciting to have done it. I'm glad I did it. It was a bit of relief. It kind of gave me kind of a little bit of closure, maybe, that I guess I'd always dreamed as a young child that possibly he was still alive, that he didn't really die in the war, that he had amnesia or something, and he would come back. But this eliminated all of that thought for sure.
Now, you mentioned that Charles Glasgow, who was the pilot, the burden of having 8 of your crew perish in something like that has to be unbearable. And then he was a POW. Did he ever mention in the letter, or were you ever able to uncover how long he was a POW for? And did he ever discuss how that was?
He was a POW until the end of the war, and he didn't really want to discuss. He just said it was really, really tough, really difficult time in his life. Now,
fast forwarding to what took place at the library, which is a very cool ceremony that's done all over the state of Florida by the Garden Club. How important was it for you to get involved in something like that, and to bring your dad into something like that? That I know your wife's involved in the Garden Club as well. So kind of take us through how that came about.
Well, she was yes, involved in the Estero Island Garden Club, and was asking them if there was something that the club wanted to do that they couldn't afford, and maybe my family could help out if they had something that really sounded important and good that could benefit the community. And they said that, they would love to have this Blue Star Memorial along Estero Boulevard to recognize all those service men and women who didn't come back. And now, veterans are included as well. And as soon as she told me, I said, I think we can help make that happen. And I talked to my brothers and sister. We still own a small company together, and each year do some donations that we think are of value to the community. We've given to the Historical Society there in Fort Myers Beach. And so we're constantly looking something that would be beneficial to the beach people and the beach and the atmosphere. And this just fell right into place because my stepfather, my sibling's father, also served in World War II in the Pacific. He lost sight in one eye. You'd never know it by having looked at him. He became a very, very successful businessman. And all of us worked in that business. I retired there in 2006. Still have one brother and a brother-in-law that are working there. But it was a way of honoring him too. So it was a family thing. Unfortunately, my brothers and sister and their families couldn't be there for the dedication.
When you sit around with your brothers and sisters, Tom, and you talk about your dad and your stepdad serving in World War II, what are those conversations like?
Well, we don't actually discuss it that very much because my stepfather, Frank Perret, would not discuss his involvement in World War II other than to say he was there, he did his job, he got injured, he was still in the service when the war was over, and he just he didn't give them anything really to discuss. As far as my father, they didn't really know him. We all called him Daddy George in absentia. And it was, they realized when I went to them with this project that it would be beneficial to both my father and stepfather. So they were 100% behind it too.
What does it mean to you to have somebody that fought in World War II? It was such an important war, and unfortunately passed away fighting in the war. What does it mean to you to have your dad representing the country the way he did?
Oh, a great deal of pride and sadness. I mean, I guess the first thing that I really remember and I realized what happened is when they brought his body back from Belgium. He had a full military funeral in Alexandria, Kentucky that I attended. I think I was 6 years old at the time, and I remember the taps. I remember the 21 gun salute. I can't remember a lot of what was said, but I do remember a few of the people that were there, and there was a crowd because my dad had evidently been pretty popular, pretty well known in northern Kentucky. I mean, he had joined Masonry. He was a Mason and a basketball star from up there. He had played basketball in high school. They didn't win the state championship, but he was an all-star player and played in the all-star game against Indiana, which is a tradition here in Kentucky. He didn't go to University of Kentucky because, unfortunately, Adolph Rupp didn't like my dad's style of shooting. He shot a one-hand jump shot, which was relatively new at the time. And Adolph Rupp was insistent that if you couldn't shoot with two hands, you couldn't shoot accurately. But my dad was evidently pretty good at Transylvania. He was the captain of the team for 2 years. And after the third year in school, he left to join the military and gave up his senior year, figuring he could go back after the war.
What was it like for you and for your mom growing up without your dad?
Well, she remarried in 1946. And it was Frank Perret was a person that she had known and I guess maybe even had a date or two with in high school, even though they went to different high schools. But when he came back from the war, they got together again and ended up marrying. So from my earliest days, I can remember him as my dad. Okay. And he did treat me just like he treated the other kids. I was very fortunate in that respect because I guess there were people where the father doesn't treat the stepson quite like the others, but that was not our situation. We were all treated as equals.
So when you see other veterans, like when you were at the memorial service last month at the library and you see other veterans, what's the conversation like? I talk about this with Forrest every time I have him on the show, Forrest Kritzer, about how differently the veterans from World War II were treated compared to the veterans from Vietnam and then the veterans from maybe an Iraq war or Afghanistan war. What is it like for you when you're around those veterans?
Well, I'm just so appreciative of what they did that allows us to have the life that we do. And I have to say that on that particular day of the dedication, I didn't get to spend much time talking to them because I was trying to help my wife get things prepared, and we were going to MC the program. But at other times, of course, I guess I'm most familiar with the Vietnam era because I've got so many friends who served in Vietnam, and I was not able to because of a back injury in college that prevented me from being able to serve. I don't think I know my parents and grandparents didn't want me to serve because I was the only son of an only son and the last one in the family. But a funny story, I did have a son who was about a year old when I got a letter that said, Thomas B. Ashford Jr., you are supposed to appear at Fort Knox on such and such a Saturday for a physical to be inducted in the Army. Well, Junior was my son. And so I went down to the selective service office and walked in. It happened to be the receptionist happened to be somebody I'd gone all through grade in high school with. And I was holding his hand. He'd just learned to walk, and we walked down this hallway, and I picked him up and stood him on the desk. And I said, "Fellas, here he is." And she said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, I've got this letter where he's supposed to report to Fort Knox next week. And his mom said that you could have him, but she'd like for him to come back after he's out of diapers." And she laughed heartily and says, "Don't worry, I'll take care of this."
That's funny. Oh, when you see some of the speaking of the younger generation, when you see some of the younger generation, maybe not your family, but the way some of these kids are these days, do you think they really appreciate as much as they might or they should what the folks in the greatest generation have gone through and the Vietnam veterans have gone through? The Vietnam veterans, I always feel like they got crapped on the most because the country asked them to go there, and then when they come back, you have citizens that didn't go there that are spitting on them and the whole thing. But do you get the impression now that people appreciate the Second World War and the Vietnam War?
No, I get the impression that they don't appreciate what they have as a result of all of these sacrifices that have been made so that they can have what they have. It's very unfortunate. I think one of the problems that this country has is that we eliminated the draft and made it so easy for people to just overlook any kind of service to the country. And we see actually in this time that the people, that the younger people for the most part are not servants. They're not looking for things to do to help others as much as the older generations. In organizations like Rotary, for example, we do get some younger people, but for the most part, we're a little bit older, and we're trying to change that. But in the United States, the younger people, they want to get involved, but it seems like the surveys have shown that they want to get involved in something like a run, walk, marathon to raise some money for a particular project, but then they want to move on to something different. They're not interested in something that's really sustainable. And I'm not sure what it's going to take to get back to where we have a situation like the greater generation got so involved in to build the country to what we know it is today.
If you had a chance to sit around with your dad today and have a conversation with him about his service, what would that conversation be like?
Oh, goodness. That's a question I hadn't really thought about. And I'm not sure. I I, I'm not even sure what he would have done with his life had he returned. So many people did something totally different than probably what they thought they would do.
Right.
And I'm not sure what he would have done. So that's a tough question. I don't know how to answer that one exactly.
So if you had a room full of young kids and a chance to make an impression on them about what you just mentioned a little while ago about serving the country and things like that, what kind of advice would you give to them?
Well, I think I'd be saying, like John F. Kennedy, I think it was the way he said it, look not to what the country can do for you, but what you can do for the country. Our society seems to be dividing more and more into those that have and those that don't have. And I don't want to get too political here, but the division seems to be creating more problems than help. And I don't know where we're headed with this, but I think it's going to be tougher on future generations until something happens that they have to stand up and take a stand on whether we're still going to have the kind of country that they want.
When people go by the library and see that memorial out there, what do you want them to get out of it?
Well, I hope it makes them think a little bit and wonder what all it is that they have as a result of the sacrifices that were made on their behalf by people that they don't know.
Tom, when are you coming back to Fort Myers?
It could be in another month or so. It may be as late as September. We're waiting to get a dock built down at the end of the street, and when the company says we can build it, I'll be back for that.
Well, it's very hot and humid down here right now, so you're not missing out on too much. But we do appreciate you coming on, and thank you for telling the story. Love hearing these stories about great heroes from our history.
Well, thank you for having me, Ed. I appreciate it.
We'll see you soon down here in Fort Myers Beach.
Thank you.
Thanks to Tom Ashford for coming on, folks, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Beach Talk Radio. Have a great day.